we know that there's one option everybody wants, and he was asked about it in a post-fight interview in the ring. David Benavidez, who was there, and obviously that's intentional, who has a fight coming up at light heavyweight in June. And that's the fight that everybody wants, Canelo Alvarez versus Dave Benavidez. We talked about this on the show. And then there's also the reality of boxing being boxing. Canelo Alvarez is noticeably really harping on the point that the money needs to be right for this fight. And I know you want to see David Benavidez, but I'll frame it to you this way. Do you think this is actually going to be the next fight that Canelo Alvarez has? Or is this more like a 2025 thing? Because that's kind of where I think this is going to go.
This fight will not happen next. If this fight was going to happen, I think Canelo would have taken it before Jaime Munguia, because David Benavidez was willing to take this fight with Canelo Alvarez. Now, here's the thing. I think Canelo Alvarez will fight his mandatory in Edgar Berlanga, because I feel like that's an easy win. And I feel like Edgar Berlanga, even though he looked really good in his last performance, if Canelo fights like this, I think Edgar Berlanga might get stopped within 6 to 7 rounds.
Oh, shit. Oh.
Because I think that's how good Canelo Alvarez looked. And I think Jaime Munguia is a little bit more polished than Edgar Berlanga, even though, you know, I thought his last fight was pretty decent from Edgar Berlanga, probably his best performance of his career. But I would still take Canelo on that fight. And I think the storylines for that would be great as well, because it's also Mexico versus Puerto Rico. And if you heard Canelo talk in the post-fight interview, he said the money has to be right, which makes me also believe that Canelo's thinking about the end of his career.
And also that he might not be crazy about the idea of fighting David Benavidez right now.
Yeah, but also he's thinking about making the most money before he retires, which is why he's asking for a big purse, right? Because this could possibly be the last fight that Canelo Alvarez fights. And if it's going to be his last fight, he's going to want it to be a moneymaker. And let's get to some of the comments, because well, actually, you should probably answer that as well.
Yeah.
But Mateo had a pretty good comment, and I know you're going to mention this as well, because this has been rumored. Canelo Alvarez fighting David Morrell. That's been rumored as well to be a part of one of the 3 fights. So he just fought Jaime Munguia. They're possibly saying Edgar Berlanga is next, and then David Morrell. That's kind of been the rumor.
Yeah. Yes, and Mateo's right. The people do need Canelo versus David Benavidez. I would have put my money on it happening next. I hope it does. I hope it does. That's the fight that I want to see the most. And I've been saying up here for close to a year now at this point. I think David Benavidez actually wins that fight. Even with the way that Canelo looks today, I think David Benavidez, he has more stamina than Jaime Munguia. Like, the volume that Jaime Munguia displayed early, I didn't think was sustainable for him, because he has too many defensive holes that Canelo Alvarez could pick apart, which is what we talked about all week, which is exactly how this fight played out. With David Benavidez, I think it's a little bit of a different equation, because he has volume on volume. He has more speed. He has a lot of power, as we know. I think the power could be sort of frustrating to try to withhold or withstand, rather, if you're Canelo Alvarez. And I think with David Benavidez, like, that's the fight that I want to see next. I think because you make the point about, like, the money has to be right. I think it's a combination of, and this is kind of what Floyd Mayweather was doing toward the end. It's a combination of money has to be right, and also right opponent. As in, if the fighter, there's like a tax if you're going to fight David Benavidez. Like, I need even more money to do that, because that's not as safe of an opponent as Jaime Munguia is, or as Jermell Charlo is, or as Edgar Berlanga potentially is. Even though I think he probably makes more money fighting David Benavidez than either of those guys, it's also like he's more of a risk. So there's a tax that comes on top of that. And I think that's sort of what they're going to have to figure out, because Canelo Alvarez might not feel like he needs that fight, and maybe he doesn't, because he's fought everybody at this point. But that's the one fight out there that I want to see the most. Edgar Berlanga is probably second, just because Mexico, Puerto Rico. But even as a Puerto Rican, I don't know if Edgar Berlanga has a shot.
So going back to the whole David Benavidez thing, because I don't think that fight is going to happen. I don't think we're going to get it this year. We can talk about it all we want, but I think Canelo knows in his mind what he wants to do. And here's the difference, though. We know that it's not a safe fight in year of 2024. I think it's
Yes.
more of an unsafe fight next year.
Yes. It
So
gets
the
riskier as he gets
longer
older. Yes.
the longer Canelo waits to make that fight, I think it's worse for him. But the longer that he waits to make that fight, that's when I think that we're not going to get it at all.
Yeah, I don't disagree with you at all because that this is what tends to happen, and this is why it was shocking that we actually got Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence. We got it a little late, but I do feel like, given how the fight went, we might have gotten that same result if it happened earlier. Probably not the same way because guys can make welterweight a little bit easier when they're younger, but at the same time, it's like they got older before that, and we were talking about that fight for years. This is a fight potentially with Dave Benavidez and Canelo Alvarez. You can't afford to milk it for that long because the age difference is so significant. Canelo Alvarez, basically, by the time he steps back in the ring, will be 34 years old because he's going to be 34 in July, and also he turned pro in 2005 as a teenager. So we're talking about mid 60 at 65 pro fights or something along those lines.
And then there's also the factor of the size. David Benavidez being an absolute listen, they don't call him the monster for anything. He's a monster in the ring. Like Canelo Alvarez would look tiny next to him, regardless of how he hydrates after the fight. So I think that fight is just one of those fights that we're dreaming about that we might not get. But hey, like what was Canelo asking for? 200 million? I don't know if he was joking around when he said that essentially, but that's like a ridiculous amount.
Yeah.
Like
And he
200 million. It's like that's not going to happen, Canelo. You know what I mean?
whatever it is, he's not asking for that much to fight Edgar Berlanga or somebody like that. I probably.